Hello everyone, welcome back to Planet Linux. With the popularity of Linux slowly growing and becoming particularly prominent in the technology YouTube sphere in recent months, more and more users are either hearing about Linux for the first time or seriously considering switching to it from their current operating system. As much of the computer world currently uses Windows, there are a large amount of Windows users that may be considering Linux as an alternative and wondering whether it's a good choice. For that reason, I'll be starting a series to compare the two systems to help users decide what might be best for them. In this case, we'll be looking at the most recent version of Windows, Windows 11, which, while it's had a slow rollout, will be available on more and more devices in the coming years. And we'll be comparing that to one of the most popular and similar looking versions of Linux, Linux Mint, specifically version 20, which is currently the most recent. This series will be split up into 5 parts, with this first one covering the installation process of each, as well as the initial setup to get both operating systems ready for use. Now, before we get started, I do want to point out that this is not inherently a competition. While we will be keeping track of what each system does well and has shortcomings with, the goal is not necessarily to pick a clear winner at the end of this. Ultimately, the system that's right for you will depend on exactly what you want to use your computer for, as both do have strengths and weaknesses. That's why we'll be covering various topics throughout this series, so you can be informed about exactly which system works well for your particular needs. After this first series covering installation and setup, Part 2 will cover productivity applications, Part 3 will be all about gaming, Part 4 will cover various customization and settings as well as accessibility, and in Part 5 we'll sum up the overall user experience and give my final thoughts. We'll start by comparing the process for installation for both systems. We'll begin with Windows, and then we'll take a look at Linux Mint. Now with Windows, it is important to note that Windows comes pre-installed on many computers, so many users won't have to go through this process at all. However, if you ever have to reinstall your system, or you're installing Windows onto a new device, then you will have to walk through the first part of this process. So the Windows installation starts out pretty simply here, asking for our language, time zone, and keyboard layout. We'll click Next here to continue, and then select Install Now. Next, we'll be greeted with a product key screen. Now, if you're installing Windows on a computer that has already been activated with Windows, it may skip this step. In some cases, you will have the option to skip this screen and use Windows unactivated with limited functionality. But this really does lead us to the first difference between these two systems, the fact that Windows is a commercial product that you do have to pay for, whether you're paying for it upfront for a Windows license, or it's included with the cost of the computer you purchased that already has Windows. Contrarily, Linux being a free and open source platform, there are no costs associated with owning and using Linux Mint, and we'll see that in a couple of moments. Next, we'll be greeted with the Microsoft Windows License Agreement. These are the terms that you have to agree with in order to comply with how Microsoft expects you to use their products and services. Of course, with Linux, there is no license agreement, as the software is not only free in terms of cost, but also with regard to how you can use it in most ways. And while some Linux software can be licensed, it is often much more open and allows you to redistribute it much more freely than you could a closed source and proprietary product such as Microsoft Windows. But to continue with our Windows installation, we will accept these terms. And next we'll be greeted with how we wish to install Windows 11. If you're installing this on an existing computer that already has Windows 10, then you may be able to use this upgrade option. However, if you're doing a clean installation of Windows 11, or you're installing this on a computer that doesn't already have Windows 10 on it, then you'll have to use the custom partitioning. Now what you'll need to do here is delete all existing partitions that your disk has so that it's just this unallocated space, and then you would click Next to install Windows onto this drive. A quick side note, many computers these days come with two storage drives, a smaller one for the operating system to be stored on, and then a slower but larger drive where all of your personal files would go. Note that out of the box, Windows does not have an easy way to set this up during an installation, where you put the operating system on the smaller, faster drive and your files stored on the larger drive. This is something that in Windows you have to go into your settings after the fact and do numerous tweaks to set this up after installation. Contrary to this, we'll see in a minute that on Linux this is actually quite easy to set up either during the initial installation or after the fact. But to put our entire Windows installation and files onto our main drive here, we'll make sure it's all unallocated space and then click Next to start the installation. Now we'll be back once Windows completes its installation. As this is on a pretty fast drive in this computer, this should only take a few minutes. If you're on an older computer or something with a mechanical hard drive, this may take a bit longer, but we'll be back once this has completed. Alright, our computer has rebooted a couple of times to finish setting things up, and we're now greeted with the out-of-box experience to set up our user account. And we're first greeted here with a screen to pick our country, and then after selecting that, we will pick our keyboard layout. That is not my keyboard layout. And I will not add a second keyboard layout. Now, the important thing to mention here is that the Home Edition of Windows 11 requires an internet connection to be set up. At this time, it is currently not possible to set up Windows 11 without an internet connection, without doing some behind-the-scenes workarounds ahead of time. So if you're using the Home Edition, there's a good chance that you will need access to a network, to an internet connection, if you wish to continue setup. At this time, if you're using Windows 11 Professional, it is still possible to set up without internet. However, this could change in the future, so do keep that in mind. Now that our computer is restarted here, it's asking us to name our computer. If you're upgrading from a previous version of Windows, this will probably have already been done and you won't have to do this step. This is just how you want the computer to show up on your network. And now for the fourth time, the computer will restart again. It rebooted for one step and then restarted again. Alright, now as I'm running Windows 11 Professional here, it's asking how I wish to set up my device. If you're running Home Edition, it will probably just default to personal use. In fact, you may not even have an option there. Now, we're asked to sign in with our Microsoft account. This is the default way that Microsoft wants you to sign into Windows, is by creating an online Microsoft account that you can use across all of your Windows devices. If you're using Windows 11 Home Edition, this is required. If you're using Professional, then it is possible to set up an offline account by selecting Sign-in Options and then selecting Offline Account. This will create a typical local user account just specific to this computer. And it explains here exactly the benefits of a Microsoft account and why you may wish to use it. But for the purposes of this video, we will set up a local account. Keep in mind that in Linux, while you can add all of your online accounts if you wish to, it's not at all a requirement to use them to set up your system. So I'll fill in these user details here. And now Windows is going to ask about a few settings regarding what kind of information we would like Microsoft to have access to. The thinking here is that this personal information they collect is used to improve their various products and services, and in some cases, quote-unquote, improve our own user experience. However, a lot of these settings do collect a significant amount of personal data as well as how you use your device. So many users will want to disable these settings. It is worth noting that even if you select to only send required diagnostic data to Microsoft, that a fairly significant amount of data regarding how you use your device is still sent. The main difference is that significantly less of it is personally linked to you. However, it is worth noting that some amount of data is still sent to Microsoft regardless. There are some ways to work around this after the fact, but without digging really deep into the system settings, regardless of what you choose here, some sort of telemetry data is going to be sent to Microsoft. Of course, with Linux, by default, in most Linux distributions, that is not the case, and if there ever is a system that wishes to collect any data, it will ask you explicitly and be sure to inform you what it wants to collect. Now Windows is checking for updates and is going to finish setting up our user account. So we'll be right back as soon as this has completed. Alright, so we are now logged into Windows, and no, your monitor is not messed up. Something is messed up here with my display. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on here, and I'll be right back. Okay, that's better. So I'm not real sure what that display issue was there. I'm not sure if it was an issue with Windows 11 itself, or the fact that I'm running it in a virtual machine, but I had to make my way into Windows Update and make sure Windows installed a display driver. So everything seems to be working now. So now that we're into Windows, that total installation from when we first began it to getting here now took about a half hour. And while there's a bit more setup we'll want to walk through in a few minutes, first let's switch over to Linux Mint and compare its installation process. Alright, here we are in the Linux Mint 20 installation media. And unlike Windows that boots straight into the installer, Linux Mint opens up into a live environment here that lets us test out and play around with Linux Mint before installing if we wish to. Now it's worth noting that anything you do in this live environment won't be saved, as it's running directly from the installation disk or USB, and it's not actually doing anything on the computer's hard drive right now. But you can feel free to mess around with Linux Mint, make sure everything works the way you want it to, before you decide to install. When you are ready to install here, we'll click this installation CD to boot the installer. And now, similarly to Windows, it starts by asking us to select our language. And clicking continue, we'll then choose our keyboard layout. Next, if we're connected to the internet, we can choose to install third-party drivers. This will install additional media codecs and file support for different types of file formats. And finally, we'll be asked where we wish to install Linux Mint to. Now, if you wish to do the same thing that we did with Windows and just install Linux Mint to the entirety of your hard drive, we can select this option here to erase the whole disk and install Linux Mint. However, if we do wish to do a custom setup, such as installing the operating system to one hard drive and storing all of our personal files by default on a second hard drive, then we can easily do that during the installation here by selecting something else and then manually configuring the partitions. I won't walk through this entire process now, as I already have a video that explains exactly how to do this, but it's a fairly simple process here that only takes a couple minutes to set up if you wish to do so. That said, we'll do the same thing here that we did in Windows and just install by default to the entire disk by selecting Erase Disk and Install Linux Mint. It confirms here exactly what it will do, that it will create a boot partition as well as the main operating system on our hard drive, and we'll click Continue. Now you'll notice here that unlike Windows, which installs the system and then reboots to have us set up our personal information, this does everything during the initial setup. For example here, it's asking us to pick our time zone, and then we're asked to enter our name, computer's name, and pick a username and password. And it does this all in this initial part while it's installing the system. Yes, I have a very secure password here. You can also pick whether you would like Linux Mint to log in automatically, or if it will require you to enter your password when you log in. For added security, you can also choose to encrypt your home folder, which will require your password to access it. This also means that if somebody takes the hard drive out of your computer and attempts to hook it up to another device to get your personal data, they will also need to know your password to access those files. Now Linux Mint will finish installing, and it gives us this nice little slideshow that we can scroll through to see some of its features while we're waiting. I'll pause the video for now to let the installation finish, and I'll be back as soon as it's done. Alright, now Linux Mint has completed the installation process, and it's asking if we'd like to restart our system now to apply everything, or if we'd like to continue testing this live environment for a little while longer. As we are all set here, we'll click to restart now, and I'll be back in just a moment once this is back up. Alright, so our computer has rebooted, and we are greeted with the Linux Mint welcome screen. Now, by comparison to Windows, this installation of Linux Mint took maybe a total of 15 minutes at most, partially due to the fact that the user creation steps were completed while the system was installing, instead of being a separate process that we had to complete after the computer rebooted, but also due to the fact that there weren't any license agreements or telemetry settings that we had to go through, and that's because Linux Mint doesn't have either of those. It's licensed under an open agreement that essentially allows you to use the system however you'd like and redistribute it as long as you give credit to the original developers. And regarding telemetry, or data collection, the reason it doesn't ask is because there is none. The only time you'll ever see anything related to data collection is if an application crashes and the system wishes to send a bug report. In that case, it would specifically ask if you wish to do so, and it would tell you exactly what information would be included. Now, both of these systems have a few setup steps that we'll wish to complete after installation, and we'll start with Linux Mint here. Now, this welcome screen makes it really easy to do, as we simply click on First Steps, and it walks us through many of the things we may wish to do, such as setting some personalization options such as our accent color and desktop theme. Set this to blue and make it a nice dark theme for now. And we can choose our panel layout, whether we want a more modern one here, or a more traditional style, kind of like a classic Windows taskbar. Next, it has an option to set up system snapshots. This is much like System Restore in Windows, and allows you to restore your system to a previous working state if you ever have issues with it. Setting this up is pretty simple, as all we really have to do is enter our password to start it here, and it walks us through the setup process. If you're not sure what to select here for your file system, for your snapshot type, most likely you can just leave it as default. And from here it will find the disks on our system. We'll select that we want to make snapshots of our main hard drive here. And we can pick a schedule for it to automatically create new restore points. For now, leaving it to backup daily and keep the 5 most recent snapshots is acceptable. And by default, we will have it exclude our personal files, as this really isn't meant to be a file backup, but rather a system restore utility. And now our system is all set up to automatically create system restore snapshots if anything ever goes wrong. Next here we have a driver manager that will pull in any additional drivers that our system may need, such as for a graphics card or any additional devices. And as we can see here, this system doesn't have any additional ones that it needs. And finally here we have a shortcut to open the Update Manager, which is where all of our Linux Mint updates will come in. It says that there's a new version of this Update Manager, so we'll apply that update real quick. And now it's pulled in all the updates that we have for our system. We will install these. And this should only take a few minutes to do. Alright, the updates have finished installing, and it prompted us to reboot the system. which we've done. And that was probably the longest part of that post-installation setup. That did take about 10 or 15 minutes to install those updates. But at this point, we're pretty much ready to go. This first step section does have shortcuts to the system settings as well as the software manager, but these are things that we'll cover in future videos. In the meantime, I want to switch over to Windows and see what needs to be done over there now that it's been installed. Alright, so back in Windows 11, contrary to Linux Mint, it does not have any sort of welcome screen to walk us through these first steps. Instead, it will start installing updates and drivers automatically in the background. On the surface, this sounds like a good thing, as theoretically you shouldn't have to worry about most of it. However, it does have a nasty habit of slowing down the system and making it rather sluggish and unresponsive while this is happening. So for this reason, we will go into Windows Update to see what it wants to pull in and potentially expedite the process to get it out of the way. And as you can see here, it actually has a bunch of updates waiting for us to install right now. So we will download these. And this will likely take a little bit here, so I'll pause the video while it's doing this, and we'll be back as soon as it's finished. Alright, so it's been about 15 minutes, and now it's prompting us to restart our computer to apply these updates. And keep in mind, when we restarted the computer after installing updates in Linux Mint, it was a normal restart that took no longer than usual. However, it does look like here in Windows that this restart will take a little bit longer than usual to apply these updates. So we'll see how long this takes here, and I'll resume the video as soon as the computer is back up. Alright, that step took about a minute there, and now the computer's rebooting. Alright, it's going to finish applying these updates. Alright, so that did take a couple extra minutes there to reboot after applying those updates. However, now it looks like we are back in. For that whole update process for Windows took a good 15 or 20 minutes to download the updates, and then when it rebooted it took an extra 3 or 4 minutes to restart and apply them, contrary to a total of about 10 or 15 minutes for the updates in Linux Mint. Now regarding the other tasks that we completed on Linux Mint from the welcome screen, such as setting up a system restore point and customizing our desktop theme, those are things that we'll have to do manually here in Windows. And I won't go through too many of these right now, as I'll have a video covering customization and a lot of the settings in the future. But I will briefly go into setting up a system restore point, as we did do that in Linux Mint, and it is a good thing to have. So to do that, we'll have to go into our Start menu and select to create a restore point. And we'll make sure that our hard drive is selected and click Configure. We want to turn on System Protection. We pick the maximum amount of space that we want the restore points to use. In this case, we'll do about 20%. It needs to have a decent chunk of space that's at least large enough for the core system files. Being this is a smaller disk, it's going to have to use most of this space here, which means we actually might need closer to 40% for a small disk like this, but really you're probably going to want at least 20 or 30 gigabytes set aside for this restore point. And then we will click OK to set that up. If you wish to create your first restore point now, then you can do so here. But for now, we'll click OK. Now, on a quick side note, you notice that the taskbar is aligned to the center. If you'd prefer to have these back on the left, either like previous versions of Windows, or how Linux Mint has theirs configured, you can right-click an empty spot of the taskbar and click Taskbar Settings. And then underneath of taskbar behaviors, you can set the location to the left. And that's where I would like to leave today's video for now, with a recap of everything that we've covered so far, as there have definitely been some pros and cons to each. However, in the case of this initial installation and setup, it's definitely more in favor of Linux Mint at this point. No need to worry, as Windows does have some strong suits that will come out in future videos, but today, Linux Mint really shined with the fact that its installation was much faster, as it didn't require multiple reboots to install the system and then set up your user. and it also didn't require an internet connection or any sort of online account to proceed with the installation. Also, Linux, of course, unlike Windows, doesn't have any data collection or telemetry. It also had the ability to easily separate your operating system from your personal files between two separate hard drives if you wish to do so, and it had a very helpful welcome screen that walked us through a lot of the initial setup steps that we may want to complete after installation, which Windows didn't have. Really, the only downside to Linux Mint that some users might see is that it didn't automatically install updates or drivers for us. That was something that we had to click on in the welcome screen to do ourselves. That said, you can enable automatic updates for the future. A lot of the big problems that many individuals have with Windows these days are shown front and center during the installation. The fact that the install process can take a fair amount of time, and more importantly, it requires both an internet connection and a Microsoft account, at least in the Home Edition, in order to even get your computer set up. There's also the fact that even the most basic telemetry setting still sends a fair amount of usage data over to Microsoft. And once the system's installed, you're kind of left on your own to figure out some other important things that you may want to set up, such as a system restore point or customizing your theme. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at the default applications that come with both of these systems, as well as looking at how you can install additional software. We'll also go through many daily productivity tasks that you use your computer for and compare how easy they are to do on both systems. Of course, after that, stay tuned for comparing many other aspects, including gaming, customization settings and accessibility, and more. If you've enjoyed this first part and can't wait to see more, please give this video a thumbs up. If there's any feedback you'd like to give or any discussion that you'd like to have, go ahead and post in the comments section. And if you haven't already, I ask that you consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification bell to stay up to date with the latest content. I also post regular updates on Twitter at PlanetLinux98. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.